In 1989, Warner Bros. Released the first live-action depiction of Batman on the big screen, directed by Tim Burton and starring Michael Keaton as the titular character and Jack Nicholson as the Joker. The film was a colossal success, earning $411 million on a budget of only $35 million and bringing in several award nominations. There was some criticism leveled towards the lack of characterization on Batman's part in favor of the Joker, and Burton's signature dark tone also received some backlash. But this was nothing, however, compared to the giant what the fuck that was Batman Returns, easily the most Tim Burton-y of the original Batman films, as well as the darkest one. While the cast and art design was praised across the board, there was significant pushback from families and parents against the incredibly graphic violence and downright disturbing dark content. Batman Returns had considerably wide-reaching consequences in terms of the entire Batman franchise. Warner Bros. Was forced to reconsider the style and aesthetic of any future Batman movies that they wanted to make in this particular series. A Catwoman spin-off was announced reprising Michelle Pfeiffer in the role and set in the same universe as the Tim Burton films. This project, however, was put on the back burner multiple times and rewritten and restructured to the point when this was what it turned into. After the significant criticism leveled at Warner Bros. For Batman Returns, the sequel, Batman Forever, was made with a much lighter and family-friendly tone, swapping out Tim Burton, who was already pretty tapped out on directing Batman as it is, with Joel Schumacher and casting Jim Carrey in the role of the Riddler. While reviews for the film were mixed at best, it was still a financial hit and successfully washed Warner Bros. Hands clean of the stain left by Batman Returns. Confident that the Batman train was back on track, the studio felt like they had found their man to keep this lucrative money-making franchise going for years to come. And thus, in 1997, the film that would single-handedly kill Batman, as well as all comic book movies for the next few years, Batman and Robin, was released. Eager to keep the families and parental audiences happy, Warner Bros. Kept the lighter tone established in Batman Forever, but just, you know, turned up to 11. Out of all previous depictions of this character, Batman and Robin has more in common with the uber-corny Adam West TV show than anything else in the previous 3 movies before it. On top of this, the movie was made with a far greater emphasis on mass marketability, with toy companies being brought in during pre-production and actually having a great deal of influence over the concept art and the designs of the characters in the final movie. The toys weren't tailored around the movie was tailored around the toys. And the major question that the audiences had upon this news coming out was, why Warner Brothers? Why were you so lazy and thoughtless in your shameless money-making business strategies? Why did you put so much more effort into merchandising and making toys than creating a good movie based on characters that we know and love? Yeah, you're probably wondering why in a video about Batman v Superman, I'm opening it up talking about Batman and Robin of all things, but don't worry, we'll come to that soon. But first off, the biggest movie in DC's lineup prior to Justice League and easily one of the most anticipated comic book movies ever made, Batman v Superman would lay the foundation for DC's entire cinematic universe. While Man of Steel had only one major DC character to set up and expand on, Batman v Superman had 2, later revealed to be 3, and then by the time the movie came out, a whole load more. At the time of its release, general consensus from audiences was that the movie was a mediocre experience with some occasionally cool moments, but ultimately ended up being nothing more than okay. The reaction from critics and longtime DC fans was, to put it mildly, angrier. The far more critical crowd viewed the movie as a giant, bloated, overly stuffed mess with more time taken to jerking off its own pretentious moral philosophies and building a cinematic universe than actually making a good Batman vs Superman movie. I myself added my own perspective when it was released and pretty much agreed with everything that the critics were saying at the time, but that itself combined with my enduring love for all things DC, especially Batman, means that my perspective is more than a little biased. So in the interest of fairness and to ensure that I don't get an army of DCEU fanboys knocking at my door in the night, let's go ahead and name some of the good stuff in Batman v Superman. And just to make it clear from the get-go, I'm talking mainly about the theatrical cut of the film because that's the version that the majority of people saw, and it's the one that both the studio and Zack Snyder signed off on being released to the masses. This was the version they thought was good enough to release in theaters, so it's the version that we're talking about today. That being said, let's get into this, and it obviously goes without saying, spoiler alert. Batman v Superman was released in 2016 and was directed by Man of Steel director Zack Snyder and written by Argo writer Chris Terrio and the ultimate comic book film hack writer David Goyer. The majority of the cast from Man of Steel returned to reprise their roles, with Henry Cavill returning as Superman, Amy Adams as Lois Lane, Lawrence Fishburne as Perry White, and bringing in newcomers to the franchise such as Ben Affleck as Batman, Jeremy Irons as Alfred Pennyworth, Gal Gadot as Wonder Woman, and Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Oh boy, I'm gonna have trouble getting through that one. I think of everyone who worked on Batman v Superman, the one who deserves the most sympathy is definitely Ben Affleck. There was tremendous pushback after the announcement that he was cast to play Batman, which I won't deny I had a hand in, but Affleck surprised everyone at the table by delivering hands down one of the best Batman performances and even one of the best performances of his whole career. He's dark and brooding as Batman, but never unrelatably so. He's charming and likable when putting on the act of Bruce Wayne, but never to the point of unbelievability, and he's a genuinely sympathetic and understandable presence during his most private, personal moments. He is easily one of my favourite portrayals of the character of Batman, and Affleck clearly worked his arse off to give the performance what he did. So when I say that this film sucks, it's not to discredit you, Mr. Affleck. You were awesome in this role, and that will forever be a credit to you. Jeremy Irons as well does a great job of balancing the sly British wit of Alfred's character with the supportive father figure demeanor needed to get Batman through the day. Gal Gadot was another uncertain casting choice that ended up working really well for the movie, and in keeping with Snyder's talents as a very visual director, the visuals of Batman v Superman are often outstanding to say the least. I mean, have you ever seen a better portrayal of the death of Bruce Wayne's parents than this little shot here? The problem with Batman v Superman isn't the absence of good things, there's plenty of those in there. The main issue stems from none of those good things adding up to something cohesive or engaging or even really all that enjoyable. The good aspects of the film are often used as counterpoints by fans to brush away any attempt at criticism of their precious perfect product that cannot possibly be condemned in the least or put down by anybody no matter how valid their points may be. But to say that the positive elements outweigh the negative ones, like the awful pacing, the dreary, far less impressive visual elements, the outright bastardization of characters, the utterly bizarre writing choices, the uninteresting plot points that go nowhere, every single fucking aspect of Jesse Eisenberg's performance? Yeah, I'm starting to remember why I hated this film so much, so how's about we stop wasting time and really get into talking about some of the good stuff? And by that I mean some of the bad stuff. The writing of Batman v Superman is easily one of its biggest weaknesses, and for multiple reasons. The film draws inspiration from several DC stories, with the two most prominent ones being The Dark Knight Returns and The Death of Superman. And this isn't subtle in the film, there are several shots that are directly lifted from panels of the original graphic novels. And honestly, the idea of drawing from themes and stories that was previously established in the original comics isn't a terrible idea to include in the movie. It makes the writing stage a bit easier as you have a basis to start from and expand on. But here's the problem with the way that Batman v Superman does it. Instead of drawing from one particular DC story, they draw from several that don't really mesh with each other. The Dark Knight Returns is a good DC story to draw from as it highlights the major ideological differences between Batman and Superman's characters and gives a good basis for why they end up fighting. But when you try meshing this particular story with, say, the Death of Superman storyline, that's where the water starts to get a bit muddied. Sure, The Dark Knight Returns could have made for great inspirational material for a Batman v Superman movie, but not when awkwardly crammed in alongside the Death of Superman. This leads me to the first major problem with the writing of Batman v Superman. There is way too much going on in it. Not only is it a film about two superheroes being at odds with each other and settling their disputes with a big fist fight, it's also a poorly done spy drama about Lois Lane digging up dirt on Lex Luthor, and a pseudo-philosophical drama exploring the implication of Superman's appearance on Earth, and a deep dive into the nature of justice and whether or not Batman's particular brand of it works, and a giant setup for future movies in the DCEU, included but not limited to a Wonder Woman movie, a Flash movie, a Cyborg movie, an Aquaman movie, a standalone Batman movie, a Justice League movie, an Injustice movie where Superman goes bad, a movie where Darkseid attacks Earth, and then so on and so on and so on and so on. As a result of cramming in all of these setups and side plots, the movie has absolutely no sense of focus. We aren't able to get the full scope of any one of these stories because the film has to hastily jump to the next one before the previous one is resolved. Nowhere is this more evident than in the inclusion of the Death of Superman storyline. At the time of this film's initial release, we've only had 2 movies to get attached to this character, and even then the films haven't done much to make us care about him. As a result of this, the emotional climax of the movie, the point where we, the audience, should be breaking down in tears, ends up falling entirely flat and being utterly uninteresting because the films have not done a good job of getting us connected to the character. The writers who originally penned the Superman character knew not to show his death until the readers had forged a lasting connection with him. The Death of Superman storyline came out in the early 90s, after decades worth of comic books featuring the character. Here, the DCEU just sneezes his death at us at the very end of the movie, even though it has barely focused on him. And we haven't forged any kind of connection with him because the film has been too preoccupied with cramming in so much stuff instead of picking and choosing the 1 or 2 elements which needed the most focus. The odd thing is, half of the stuff that Zack Snyder and David Goyer crammed into the film could have easily been cut out. There are a number of plot cul-de-sacs that go nowhere and have nothing to do with the story but are shoved in there anyway to flimsily justify having certain characters in the movie. Lois Lane has next to no purpose in Batman v Superman other than to reveal that Lex Luthor is the bad guy, a conclusion that we could have come to pretty damn quickly on our own without diverting a huge ton of the focus of the film to this nonsense CIA subplot that adds nothing to the story and only disrupts the film's flow. Lois's story has no bearing on Superman's or Batman's or Wonder Woman's or really anybody's. It is the ultimate example of how not to do subplots, and if anything acts only as an admission that Lois's presence in the film is utterly pointless. But Lois Lane's awkward inclusion in Batman v Superman is just one example of an element that's being forced into the film even though it doesn't have any purpose there. And if you want a further example of what I'm talking about, let's go ahead and discuss... Easily the most painfully lazy scenes in the whole of Batman v Superman are these 2 right here. First one has Batman falling to sleep and dreaming of a post-apocalyptic future where Superman goes all fascist dictator and tries to conquer the Earth. The other is Wonder Woman getting a flash drive containing a bunch of gratuitous cameos setting up future movies. There are multiple problems with these scenes, both from a pacing and narrative perspective, but also when it comes to cinematic universe building. For one thing, just like with half of the subplots that go nowhere, the movie grinds to a complete halt when these scenes come on. They have absolutely no impact on the plot and are simply there to advertise future movies and characters that we've yet to be introduced to. No information that we get during these scenes has any bearing on the movie and are never mentioned again once they're over and done with. Good universe building should feel organic. It should feel like it has a purpose in the film and the franchise that you're trying to make. Just take Marvel as the most obvious example. Even the most heavy-handed attempts to build its franchise didn't feel as overt and disconnected from the story as these scenes in Batman v Superman. In the case of the DCEU, the universe building feels so tacked on and agonizingly forced because it is. The setups feel less like clever integrations into the film to expand the possibility of its world, world, and more like adverts dropped right in the middle of the movie to show off the next few films that the studio has up its sleeve. It's not enough to be invested in the DCEU on the strengths of the movies that make it up, we also have to watch commercials in the middle of the frickin' things just to remain interested in it. So not only is Batman v Superman incapable of telling a cohesive story without being distracted with a bunch of side plots, it can't even integrate elements to its own universe building without them feeling forced and disconnected from everything else. And seeing how this was a movie which Warner Brothers thought the only purpose of was just to show off its big cinematic universe, that's really kinda sad. Another big problem with Batman v Superman is the nonsensical character motivations. You know how I mentioned the Dark Knight Returns comic and how it does a good job setting up the ideological differences between Batman and Superman so you completely understand why the fight between them takes place? Yeah, they don't bother doing that in Batman v Superman. Instead, we're given vague snippets as to why Batman hates Superman and the absolute weakest of motivations for Superman to want to fight Batman. Again, this is another case of missed opportunity as the potential for strong character motivations are there, they just aren't tapped into in an engaging way. From the offset, it should be clear to us why Batman would hate Superman. He witnesses the destruction of Metropolis during the fight between Superman and Zod, and so naturally acts with mistrust and animosity towards Superman, as there's no way to tell whether he is on Earth's side or not. But this motivation is thrown completely into question when, after sparing Superman's life, he completely forgets about the existential threat that his former adversary presented. Batman goes from saying this about Superman 1 minute,
he has the power to wipe out the entire human race, and if we believe there's even a 1% chance that he is our enemy, we have to take it as an absolute certainty. And we have to destroy him.
to saying this about him the next.
I'm a friend of your son's.
Dude, 10 minutes ago you hated the guy, you considered him the ultimate threat to human life on Earth. Now all of a sudden you're buddies with him because your mums share the same name? Seriously? And this isn't even really an issue with the whole "Save Martha" thing being what stops Batman from killing Superman. The issue is that Batman has a sudden, inexplicable change of personality in a matter of minutes because of the most arbitrary of reasons. It's kind of the inverse of Anakin Skywalker in Revenge of the Sith.
I'm going to turn you over to the Jedi Council.
You are never a god. You are never even a man. It's okay. I'm a friend of your son's.
I figured.
You can't have a character swing between these two extremes without having more development leading them to that point. I'm all for having a character arc where Batman learns that killing Superman is the wrong thing, but to have him do a complete and total 180 character shift in the span of seconds undermines all of the build-up for his motivation for hating Superman. If it was really that easy for him to drop his hatred for the guy, then it mustn't have been a very powerful hatred to begin with. In which case, what was the fucking point of the last 2 hours worth of build-up? But in terms of weak character motivations, that's honestly just the tip of the iceberg. Superman's reasons for disliking Batman in the movie are incredibly vague and hypocritical even before Lex Luthor kidnaps his mum and forces the two to fight. At one point we get this.
Civil liberties are being trampled on in your city. Good people living in fear. I've seen it, Mr. Wayne. He thinks he's above the law.
But as pointed out by Batman in the same scene, this is astonishingly hypocritical of Superman, seeing how he does the exact same goddamn thing. He himself is a vigilante who operates outside of the law, same as Batman. But this is nothing compared to Superman's reasons for fighting Batman in the movie. In The Dark Knight Returns, the main motivation behind the final conflict between the two superheroes was their starkly differing ideologies. Superman is allied with the government after all non-supervised empowered persons are outlawed, leaving those like Batman on the peripheries to fight crime without the sanction of the powers that be. He no longer has the Justice League behind him, he has once again become a vigilante who fights against criminals, with Superman being sent as a representative to either talk him down or kill him. Their conflict is between the collectivist, Superman, and the individualist, Batman. In the movie, Superman's reasons for fighting Batman is cause Lex Luthor is holding his mother hostage. Yeah, that's it. No real reason other than that. I mean, sure, they try to set up something about him not liking that Batman is a vigilante, but as previously stated, that motivation is hypocritical and amazingly weak. One of the biggest problems with Batman vs Superman is that there is no real impetus for the fight between Batman and Superman to take place. One character is an emotionally unstable murdering vigilante who hates Superman for being a potential weapon of mass destruction, but is at the same time perfectly happy discarding his paranoia at a moment's notice when someone mentions that they have mothers with the same name, and the other character is a self-righteous hypocrite asshole whose only real motivation for engaging in the fight is because some other guy is forcing him to do so because he kidnapped his mummy. Also, just quick little side note, this whole fight could have been easily avoided if Superman would just stop at one point and tell Batman about Lex Luthor and his mother. Even if you make the argument that Batman wouldn't believe him, I'm sure he would if once Superman has Batman bested, he stops throwing punches and just flat out tells him the villain's evil plan. I mean, what was stopping him from telling the truth? Was he just getting too wrapped up in the fight to care? Because if so, that makes Superman just as much of an emotionally unstable, aggro-thinking dipshit as Batman. The motivations for Batman and Superman wanting to fight each other are poorly set up, poorly explained, and result in nothing but a giant, overly CGI'd fight that could be recreated by any 8-year-old with a couple of action figures. But in terms of the poor character motivations in this movie, the gold medal has to go to... As a character, Lex Luthor is meant to be calm, reserved, intimidating, calculating, manipulative, and never lacking a plan. The Lex Luthor of Batman v Superman is a childish, hammy, over-the-top, ridiculously acted moron of a villain whose character is scarcely defined and whose motivations are even less so.
Bruce Wayne meets Clark Kent. Ah, I love it. I love bringing people together. How are we?
Lex.
The red capes are coming. The red capes are coming. For that, he was given a thunderbolt. True! Little red notes, big bang, you let your family die! Maybe one day Dad'll come back if I just keep everything the same. That is silly. Why do we have problems up here? And knowledge is power. And I am... no. No, what am I? I don't know! I would not let them tell me! Now,
Dude, what the fuck are you even doing now? I don't think there are many actors alive and in Hollywood less suited to this role than Jesse Eisenberg. Especially when you consider that there were so many other possibilities out there for the role that the studio was practically spoilt for choice. Honestly, if I were to pick an actor to play Lex Luthor, I would have cast Michael C. Hall, Dexter Morgan in a heartbeat. The guy is the perfect age to play the character. He's got mad acting talent, a huge range at his disposal, and he's had plenty of experience playing a manipulative psychopath before. They could have so easily cast him in this role and the movie would have been a million times better, but no, they thought it would be a good idea to cast Mr. Zucker Eisenberg in the role, even though that there's no shred of the character in his performance and there never was from the beginning, so it's honestly astonishing to me that the casting directors thought that this would be a good idea, so what the frickin' In terms of character butchering, no one in Batman v Superman comes out looking worse than Lex Luthor. I was never even a huge fan of the character before watching the film, but even I know this is not the same guy from the comics. Hell, he's not even in the same ballpark. He is every bit Lex Luthor as Ryan Reynolds was Deadpool in X-Men Origins Wolverine. One of these Lex Luthors is a ruthless and calculating character with a clear and understandable desire to best Superman and prove himself as the better man. The other is a schizophrenic nutjob who changes his reasons for doing anything on a dime without any setup or explanation. In Batman v Superman, Lex's reasons for wanting Superman dead is... what exactly? Because he's too powerful and he's a risk to humanity? Well, it can't really be that, because why would he create a giant spiky puffball that he calls Doomsday at the end of the film in order to kill Superman? Essentially creating another sentient weapon of mass destruction in the interest of killing the first one. Is it because he wants power and recognition from the people like his comic book counterpart? Well, if that's the case, how exactly will Batman killing Superman achieve that, which was your plan to begin with? In fact, how does it benefit you in the least, to go to all of this trouble to manipulate a giant fight between these two guys? Does it make your company any more profitable? I can't really see how, unless suddenly you're into the business of filming live superhero death matches. Are you just an attention-seeking fuckboy Lex Luthor who likes seeing grown men fight each other because you've got nothing better to do with your time? That seems pretty feasible. Or are you just a poorly written villain with little care taken to define your motivations or even your character? Yep, I'm gonna go with that one.
I don't hate the sinner. I hate the sin.
10 seconds to end.
And yours, my friend, is existing.
Wow, that really tells us a lot about you. I really feel like I understand exactly why you hate this guy now. Because he exists. Yay! There are a few things more annoying to me in movies than big ideas that are poorly executed, and nowhere is this more prevalent than in Batman vs Superman. Much like subplots, care needs to be taken in order to bring philosophical concepts into a movie in order for them to work. Make them too heavy-handed, and they end up feeling like the film is beating the audience over the head with its obvious messaging. Make it too vague, and the audience won't have any idea what message the film is trying to impart in the first place. Quite amazingly, Batman v Superman manages to accomplish both of these things by screaming philosophical ideas at the audience, but with no weight or purpose behind them whatsoever. Most of Lex Luthor's hammily delivered dialogue is comprised of hackneyed references to various gods and religious tales, but with no actual meaning behind any of them. Again, these are good setups that are never delved into. The movie makes mention that, hey, maybe Superman is kinda like the devil, just like he's kinda like God. But it doesn't really go anywhere with this. It just stops at that basic philosophy and says nothing more on the subject. Nothing about Luthor's diatribes on the devilish nature of someone with Superman's powers means anything in the story because they aren't expanded on. But what's worse than the meaningless philosophies that the film keeps spewing out at us is the way that it goes about delivering them. In good movies with philosophical backbones, the ideas and concepts are subtle. They are delivered to the audience in a way that feels naturally integrated into the story. Batman v Superman, though, tries another way of discussing philosophy, literally have the characters discuss it without it having any impact on the story. At a point in the movie, we get a big montage of Superman saving a bunch of random people while TV broadcasts play, showing Neil deGrasse Tyson literally spoon-feeding the film's big philosophical ideas to the audience. This is an astonishingly lazy way of revealing hidden philosophies in your story, partially because it's not at all hidden. Just like with the post-apocalyptic scenes and the Justice League cameo scene, the pacing comes to a complete halt when the movie decides that it wants to be a big boy now and try talking about something important and philosophical. It's lazy, it's boring, it's tedious, and it just does not make for compelling cinema. So by this point, we've pretty much established that neither the characters, nor the subplots, nor the action scenes, nor the philosophical ideas mean a single goddamn thing in the movie. They're all either interesting setups with no payoffs, or they have absolutely no place in the film and so should not have been included. So with a movie this chock full of things that mean absolutely nothing to the product and should not have even been there to begin with, what's even the point of it? The real tragedy of Batman vs Superman is that it took one of the biggest, most highly anticipated comic book movies of all time, something that was practically gift-wrapped for Warner Brothers to make boatloads of cash off of, something that had all the potential to be a deep, powerful, exhilarating movie, and turned it into a morose, dull, flat, uninteresting mess of a film with no real clue as to what it wants to be. When the movie was first announced, I, like everyone else, was hyped as hell. Even after enduring the boredom of Man of Steel, I was so excited to see a movie where we got to see these two powerhouse comic book characters actually fight on the big screen. But as more and more news came out around the film, the more and more I realized the true purpose behind its existence. From the moment Ben Affleck was announced to be playing Batman, which, again, I stress turned out to not be a bad thing, to Wonder Woman being announced to be in the movie, to one of the biggest casting errors in the history of cinema, it became clear why this movie was made. naked, unapologetic profit. It's called Batman vs Superman, but let's just throw Wonder Woman in there for the sake of setting up more DCEU movies. Everybody thought that Heath Ledger as the Joker would suck, but then everybody loved how weird and crazy he acted. So let's just cast Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor and have him do the exact same thing. All these decisions were made because the studio thought that it would guarantee them more profit, even at the cost of sacrificing quality. And just to illustrate what I mean, as well as indicate the schizophrenic tone of this movie, I'm going to go over the lead up to the big fight of the movie as well as its aftermath. Lex Luthor blackmails Superman into fighting Batman. The two big guys have a 10-minute fight, Lois comes in and stops Batman from killing Superman. Batman then goes off to save Martha, while Superman goes off to take out Lex Luthor. And within seconds of this fight coming to an end, all sense of Batman and Superman related tension is completely and utterly lost. Most of the film has been building up to this big conflict, and after a brief 10-minute scuffle, it's quickly waved away as if it were some minor inconvenience that had no real bearing on the plot. And the thing is, if you think about it, it really didn't. The movie is called Batman v Superman, and yet the actual fight between Batman and Superman has little to no impact on the actual plot of the film. The characters haven't grown or furthered themselves in the least, as shown by Batman still being totally okay with murdering criminals. The plot hasn't really moved along since the 10 minutes before this whole thing started, so really the whole conflict, the big spectacle that this movie has been built around, adds up to absolutely nothing. It is vapid and stale and leaves absolutely no impact, just like the rest of this movie. Nothing in Batman v Superman leaves an impact on you because none of it has any real meaning. The fights between Batman and Superman mean nothing, Lois Lane means nothing, Lex Luthor means nothing, all of the philosophical crap means nothing, Superman's death means nothing, even the setups for future movies means absolutely nothing. And the real horrible thing is that that's kind of what Warner Brothers wanted. Their only interest lay in making a giant setup for a cinematic universe that had the potential to rival Marvel's. They weren't interested in making a movie, they were only interested in making a commercial. Remind you of anything? Much in the same way that Batman and Robin's only real purpose was to sell Batman toys, Batman v Superman's only real purpose was to advertise a giant cinematic universe that by this point most of us have already lost interest in. And the irony behind all of this is, we probably would have been more open to watch the DCEU had Warner Brothers not tried so hard to sell us on it. We, the audience, want to see movies, not commercials. And the sad fact is that by the time production on Batman v Superman came to an end, that's all it really was. One giant, shameless, unapologetic commercial. And little did we know, it was only going to get worse.